My daughter-in-law did not know I was conscious when she said, "Make sure she's really gone before you call anyone." I had been lying on the flagstone path at the bottom of the garden steps for 11 minutes at that point. My left hip was screaming. My mouth tasted of iron. The grass beside my cheek was cold and wet and smelled of autumn. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I'm not a dramatic woman. I have never been given to scenes or performances. In 71 years of living, I can count the number of times I raised my voice in anger on one hand. I am the kind of woman who folds things quietly and puts them away. I always have been. But there are moments in a life when the thing you have suspected for a very long time suddenly presents itself in the open, and you have a single choice: act on it or let it pass. And letting it pass means it disappears forever. The truth goes back underground. The people who buried it go on about their lives, and you go on about yours, carrying the weight of what you almost knew. I did not let it pass. My name is Evelyn. I am 71 years old. I live in the house my late husband Raymond and I bought in 1987, a stone house with a long back garden that slopes down to an old stone wall. There are steps cut into the slope, 8 of them. Raymond built them himself in the summer of 1993, mixing the mortar on a Saturday morning with our son watching from the kitchen window. Our son is called Martin. He is 44 years old. His wife is called Diane. They have 2 children, and they live 20 minutes away. And for the past 7 years, I have had a feeling about them that I could never quite put into words. Not a suspicion exactly, more like a question that never found its answer. A presence in the room when there was no one there. The question was about Raymond. Raymond died in the autumn 12 years ago. He was found at the bottom of those garden steps on a Tuesday morning in October, early, before I had risen. The verdict was accidental death. He had tripped in the dark. He had been out early, as he sometimes was, to check the garden before the frost came. He had fallen. He had struck his head on the lower stone. He had died, the pathologist said, quickly. I was told I should be grateful it was quick. I never entirely believed it. Not because I had evidence. I had nothing. No witness. No inconsistency the police had not already considered and dismissed. No physical proof of anything other than what the report concluded. I had only the feeling, the one that would not leave. The one I carried for 12 years through every Sunday dinner and every Christmas morning and every birthday telephone call, smiling at my son and his wife and saying nothing, because what could I say? What would I even accuse them of? A feeling? A question? Grief makes you see things, people told me. Grief makes you want someone to blame. I knew that. I accepted it as a possibility. I told myself it was probably true, but the feeling never left. Raymond was a patient man, a careful man. He checked things, he measured things. He did not walk down garden steps in the dark without a torch. He had kept a torch on the kitchen windowsill for 30 years for exactly that purpose. I found it there the morning they told me what had happened, still on the windowsill, still there. I mentioned the torch to the detective who spoke to me. She wrote it down. She said she would pass it along. Nothing came of it. I understand why. A man in his 60s, found at the bottom of garden steps in the early morning with a head injury consistent with a fall. The torch on the windowsill was unusual, but not impossible. Perhaps he had forgotten it. Perhaps he had been half asleep. Perhaps he had simply misjudged the step in a way he had never misjudged it before. Perhaps Raymond had made a new will 6 weeks before he died. I did not know this until 3 months after the funeral, when his solicitor contacted me. Raymond had updated the will without telling me. He was entitled to do so. The will had not changed significantly in its overall structure. The house and the majority of the estate came to me, as they always had. But there was one addition, a clause I had not seen before. A clause that directed a specific amount, £40,000, to be held in a separate account, accessible only to me, not to Martin, designated explicitly for my own personal use, and not to be considered part of any shared marital or family fund. £40,000, set aside specifically, fenced off from Martin. Raymond had done that 6 weeks before he died, and had said nothing to me about it. I thought about that for a long time. Martin had borrowed money from Raymond. This was not a secret exactly, though it had never been spoken of directly in my presence. I knew because Raymond had mentioned it once, in the spring before he died, not as a complaint, but as a fact, the way Raymond mentioned facts, evenly, without drama. He said Martin had needed some help. He said he had helped. He did not say how much. He did not say whether he expected it back. After Raymond died, Martin never mentioned the money, not once. I did not bring it up. I assumed, in the way that grieving people assume things, that it had been forgiven, that Raymond would have wanted it forgiven, that it was simply one of those things families absorb and move past. It was only later, when I was going through Raymond's papers in the study, that I found the figure. Not 40,000, not 30,000, £112,000, transferred in 4 separate payments across 18 months. Documented in Raymond's careful handwriting in a ledger I had not known existed. With a note at the bottom of the final page in Raymond's hand that said simply, "Not a gift, awaiting return." I put the ledger away. I sat with it for a long time. I did not know what to do with it. I did not know what it meant in the context of everything else I did not know. But I kept it. The years after Raymond's death changed Martin in ways I could not always name. He was attentive in the beginning. He visited regularly. He helped with the garden. He checked the gutters. He was present in the way a son is present when he knows he is being watched by his own conscience. But by the 3rd or 4th year, something had shifted. The visits became shorter, the telephone calls less frequent. When I mentioned things that needed doing around the house, there was always a reason why this week was not possible, or next week would be better. Or perhaps I should think about whether the house was really still practical for a woman on her own. That word, practical. Martin used it often when it came to the house, as in, "Mum, is it really practical with those steps?" Or, "Mum, a house this size, is it really practical for one person?" Or on one occasion that I remember with particular clarity, "Mum, if something happened to you on those steps, no one would know." He meant it as concern. I received it as something else. Diane was the one who raised the question of the will. She did it carefully, the way Diane did most things, through implication, through the side door. She mentioned a friend of hers whose elderly mother had managed her estate badly toward the end, and what a terrible situation that had been for the family. She mentioned that there were professionals who could help with these things. She mentioned with a small smile that Martin worried about these things sometimes, as a loving son naturally would. I smiled back. I said I appreciated their concern. I changed the subject. That evening I called my own solicitor. I told her I wanted to review my will. I told her I was considering some changes. And then I told her about the ledger, about the £112,000, about the note in Raymond's handwriting. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Evelyn, I think you should keep that ledger somewhere safe." I already had. The invitation to come for lunch on the second Saturday of October arrived by text. Diane had sent it. She said Martin wanted to talk to me about something. Nothing urgent, just a few things they'd been thinking about. She said it would be nice to have a proper conversation in person. She used the word proper 3 times in one message. I knew what the conversation would be about. I had known for some time. The house, the will, the estate, the practical matters of a woman living alone. I had prepared for it in my own way. I had documents, I had the ledger, I had my solicitor's advice. I was ready to have the conversation calmly and clearly and on my own terms. What I was not prepared for was the garden. After lunch, Martin suggested we take a walk. He wanted to show me something he'd noticed about the old wall at the bottom of the garden, something about the mortar, something that might need attention. He was very specific about it. He wanted me to come and look at the particular spot. He was already walking toward the steps as he said it. Diane stayed at the kitchen table. She said she would clear up. She did not look at me when she said it. I went with Martin. I went because something in me needed to know. Not what he was going to do, I did not let myself think that far. But something that had been waiting for 12 years was pulling me toward those steps. And I went. We were on the 4th step from the top when Martin turned to say something, and in turning, he stepped toward me and his arm came up, and for one single instant, I saw his face. And then I was falling. I do not know if he meant it. I have thought about this more than I can say. I do not know if his foot slipped, or if he lost his balance, or if what I saw in his face for that one instant was intention. I do not know. What I know is that I hit the 2nd step with my shoulder, and then the flagstone path at the bottom, and the pain was extraordinary. And there was a moment of ringing silence in my head, and then I was still. And Martin was above me on the steps, looking down. I could hear him breathing. He did not come down. He stood on the steps for what felt like a very long time. And then I heard the kitchen door open, and Diane's footsteps on the path, quick and deliberate, and she was beside him, and he said in a voice I had never heard from him before, "She fell." Diane said nothing for a moment. Then she crouched down, not to help me, not to check me, but to look at me closely. And she said, not to me, to Martin, quietly, "Make sure she's really gone before you call anyone." I did not move. I kept my breathing shallow. I kept my eyes closed. The flagstone was cold under my cheek, and the pain in my shoulder and hip was considerable. But I have been through pain before. I have buried a husband. I have carried questions for 12 years. I could lie still for a few more minutes. What followed, in the 11 minutes I lay on that path, was this. Martin said, "We'll lose the house if we don't move now. The ledger." Diane said she had thought about the ledger. She said they should have taken it years ago. Martin said they didn't know about it years ago. Diane said she had suspected. She said Raymond had been about to go to a solicitor about it, about the money, and that was why. That was why they had come that Tuesday morning before I was awake, to speak to him. just to speak to him. But he had already been in the garden, and he had heard them on the steps, and he had turned, and Martin had just... Diane said, "You couldn't have known how it would land." She said that, those words. You couldn't have known how it would land. I lay on the cold stone, and I listened to my son and his wife describe the morning Raymond died. And I understood, in that stillness, that the question I had carried for 12 years was not grief making me see things. It was not the mind searching for blame. It was knowledge. It was the part of me that loved Raymond well enough to know that what the report described was not who he was, and not how he lived, and not how a man who kept a torch on the windowsill for 30 years comes to be found at the bottom of his own steps in the dark. I had known. I had simply not had the words for it. I heard Martin say he was going to call the ambulance. I heard him say it would look like the same thing. An old house, dangerous steps, an elderly woman living alone. He said it gently. He said it the way you say a terrible thing when you have decided it is necessary. I opened my eyes. I put my hands on the cold stone, and I sat up. The sound Diane made when she saw me move is not something I will describe. I will only say that it confirmed everything. I looked at my son. I said, "I heard you." He did not speak. I said, "All of it." And then I reached into the pocket of my coat, and I held up the small digital recorder I had placed there that morning before leaving for their house. The one my solicitor had told me to bring. The one she had told me to carry every time I was alone with them. The one that had been recording since the moment I fell. There is nothing to say about the 20 minutes that followed that I wish to set down here. What I will say is that I called my solicitor from the garden path, and then I called the police. What the recording contained, together with the ledger Raymond had kept and the statements I had given my solicitor over the previous months, was enough. It was more than enough. The investigation took 14 months. I will not walk through its proceedings. I will only tell you that Martin and Diane are no longer in the house 20 minutes away, and that the stone steps at the bottom of my garden were rebuilt last spring by a man I hired who mixed the mortar carefully on a Saturday morning, the way Raymond once did. I want to tell you what I have learned from 12 years of carrying a question with no answer. The world will tell you that grief distorts, that love makes you see things, that the mind in mourning constructs enemies and intentions because it cannot bear the randomness of loss. And this is sometimes true, I do not doubt it. But it is not always true. And the difference between the two, between grief's distortion and genuine knowledge, is something only the person carrying it can feel. It lives in the body before it lives in the mind. It is the feeling that does not leave, even when you have given it every reason to. I ignored that feeling for 12 years because I was afraid of what it meant, afraid of what it would cost me, afraid of being wrong and of being the kind of person who accused her own son of something unforgivable on the basis of nothing more than a torch left on a windowsill and a question that would not sleep. What I know now is this. The quiet ones are not imagining things. The ones who say little and carry much and fold everything away, they are not confused. They are not sentimental. They are watching. They are listening. They have been listening for years. Raymond used to say that the still water shows you the most. He meant it about the lake near where he grew up, where the surface in the early morning reflected everything perfectly because nothing was moving through it. He said you could see the whole sky in the water if you were quiet enough to let it settle. I have thought about that often in the past year, about what it means to be still enough to see clearly, about what it costs, and about what it gives you in the end. I do not feel victorious. I want to be clear about that. There is no version of this story that ends well enough. Raymond is still gone. The steps are still there. The autumn still comes. And the grief of discovering that what I feared was true is not a lighter grief than the one I would have carried if I had been wrong. It is simply a different shape. A grief with edges instead of fog. But I am still here, in this house, in this garden, using the good plates on Sunday because Raymond said they should not wait for company. Walking the same path I have always walked, a little more slowly now, a little more carefully on the uneven ground, but walking it. The quiet ones endure, not because we are made of something harder than other people, but because we learned, long ago, to make peace with carrying things. And because when the moment finally comes, when the ground gives way and the truth surfaces and you have to decide whether to stay still or let it go, the quiet ones already know what to do. We have been practicing our whole lives. If this story found you in a quiet place of your own, a question you have been carrying, a truth you cannot quite name, a weight that will not leave, I hope something in it helped you feel a little less alone with it. If it did, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you would like to stay in this room a little longer, Voices of Quiet Souls will be here. Subscribe. We keep the light on for the quiet ones.